Actually, today we're doing something a little different, and I'm not going to use that video that I recorded back in the summer of 2023. But I am still Brett from papercartridges.com. I'm here at the talk in godforsaken Camp Beer in Kuwait. It's February 2024. I'm almost at the halfway point of my deployment, and I did originally record that video for the ammunition for the Model 1854 Lorenz. It's back in the summer of 2023, if you can believe that. And it was a good video. Nothing was really wrong with it, except that it's missing the last 6 months of continuous research that I've been doing. I don't have a whole lot of free time out here to research, but I do have to travel now like once a week or so to a different base, rack up that hostile fire pay when you can get it. But the soldiers next to me watch their TikTok videos, and I'm on my phone reading 160-year-old German language Austrian primary sources about musket cartridges. Yeah, I'm a lot of fun at parties. But I realized I have to remake this video, so please excuse the settings here, any background generator noise. This is the quietest place on the base. I've sent the soldiers home, so I have to talk to myself, and I hope that remaking this video we can cover a little bit more of the background, the history and the context and the story behind why these things were important. So let's jump right in. Start with some background and context for the development of the Lorenz cartridge. And to start, we have to go back to the very early 1850s. So let's say 1851, 1852, when the rifle musket is brand new technology. Most armies in this era are still using smoothbores, and the few armies that do have rifles at this point have these crude, enormous caliber monstrosities. So think of like the Delvine chamber rifle, the 71 caliber Kammerbuchse that the Austrians had. Others have the Touvenon pillar breech system, and some have the brand new Minié system. So Claude Minié's famous hollow-based bullet with the iron cup starts to appear 1850, 1851. One example is the English pattern 1851 Minié rifle. It's got a 702 caliber bore, so huge bore, crude first generation rifles. And these are given circa 1851. They're only going to specialized troops. The European armies have recognized the usefulness of a rifle, but the limited performance, the big bores, the real slow muzzle velocities limit their capabilities. And technology is changing very fast. And it's in 1851, we're at the start of a furious debate across all the Western militaries versus the simple, tried and true, battle-proven smoothbore, or this new rifle with theoretical capabilities. And at this time, Austria did have some rifles for specialized purposes. They were issued to their elite troops, very large bores like the 71 caliber Kammerbuchse. They shoot pretty crude bullets, the Spitzkugel, which is one of the first pointed bullets ever developed for a rifle. And it's around 1852 that a small arms factory supervisor at the great Vienna arsenal named Joseph Lorenz is coming up with a new bullet design, and he initially introduces this design for the rifles in Austrian service, so the 71 caliber Kammerbuchse among others. And his idea is a compression bullet. So this is a bullet that will expand from the force of gas in the chamber rather than the previous way that rifle bullets got expanded, and that's the soldier is pounding the bullet down with the ramrod onto a pillar or into a chamber at the breech of the gun. So this bullet for 71 caliber bores is enormous, but it does work. It works, but it doesn't work great. The bore is just too large for a compression system to work. In the 1860s, Alfred von Kropatschek, who later developed the tube magazine for modern rifles, he said that the compression bullets were still being partially expanded in these older rifles by the soldier smacking it with the ramrod rather than the force of the exploding gunpowder compressing the bullet. So Lorenz concludes the obvious that this concept will work a lot better with a smaller bore, so that the gas will expand it alone. And this also lets you have a smaller, lighter, and faster bullet. And it's at this time that a very young Kaiser Franz convenes a commission that's looking into the new generation of arms for the Imperial Royal Army. And the objective of this commission is to adopt one common modern system and standardize around one new modern gun for the Army. And the commission debates the big question: is this new weapon going to be a smoothbore or is it going to be a rifle? And Joseph Lorenz is a member of the Gewehrversuchskommission, and he takes his compression bullet, he shrinks it down, he designs a new rifle with the latest modern features in 1862, and he presents it to the commission. And in 1863, December 1863, Kaiser Franz authorizes the testing of the Lorenz prototype. The commission really likes it, but it's still 1853, so they're not quite ready yet to abandon the smoothbore musket. The commission proposes making a rifled version of the Lorenz for the specialized troops and for NCOs, and then a smoothbore version for everybody else. And the Kaiser approves this. This actually was about to be implemented, but there was an incredibly obstinate field marshal, von Bernhardt, and he insists that no, we have to adopt a rifle for everybody. We cannot stick with smoothbores in any capacity. He pretty much throws his rank down on the table, writes letters to the Kaiser, and says, we have to have a rifle. And the Kaiser, to his credit, is convinced by this, and he's persuaded to give everyone a rifle. There will be no smoothbore version. The Imperial Royal Army will have a universal infantry weapon that is rifle. They'll have different systems of sights, but everyone is still going to have a rifle. And this rifle that the commission chooses to adopt, it's not just any rifle, but it is the System Lorenz, which would become the Model 1854 Infanteriegewehr and the rest of the family of System Lorenz rifles. Both the rifle and the bullet were designed by Lorenz, which is kind of unusual to have the same guy develop the rifle and the ammunition. It's frequently called the Lorenz Gewehr, especially in the early period. But for the early 1850s, the System Lorenz is fantastically modern, and we need to slow down and really let that sink in, just how futuristic this thing was. So the Lorenz is a 6-line 4-point rifle in the old Austrian measurement, which is about 13.9 millimeter or a 5.47 caliber. And no one has ever given their entire infantry a rifle with such a small bore. And for the early 1850s, 5.47 caliber is extremely audaciously small bore. But there's a reason for that. Lorenz determined this is pretty much the largest bore that we can use where a compression bullet is really going to be practical. And ultimately, Kaiser Franz approves the rifle. It is officially the Model 1854, and it takes forever to get actually fielded to the Imperial Royal Army, but that's a story for another day. But we do have the Model 1854 Lorenz with, of course, the famous compression bullet, and it is the Paper Cartridges logo for something like a decade now. I've always really appreciated the Lorenz and that compression bullet. It's a 29-gram bullet, about 450 grains. And how does it work? And obviously, it is in the name. It's a compression bullet, and it has these extremely deep grooves at the back end of the bullet and a long, heavy front end. And the grooves cut deep, halfway into the bullet, and the grooves are so deep that they deliberately weaken and lighten the rear end of the bullet. So the soldier would ram the bullet down onto the powder, And the Lorenz rifle used a much finer powder than previous rifles. And the gun fires. And thanks to the unique burn properties of black powder, this massive high pressure sledgehammer basically blasts against the base of the bullet. And this is where it gets extremely interesting and the physics get weird. The bullet is a soft, heavy object at rest, especially the heavy front part of the bullet. And it doesn't want to move because of its inertia. Lead is also fairly soft and malleable. So when you have this sudden sledgehammer-like effect at the back end of the bullet, the lighter, weak back end of the bullet gets pushed up against the front. And this happens before the entire bullet itself really even starts to move. So there's something of an accordion effect. The bullet compresses, and as it does, um, two things happen. And the first, this is the main action of a compression bullet, is that the bullet compresses upon itself. It collapses upon itself, and it ends up being a lot shorter. You need to remember that because that will be important a little later. But as the bullet compresses, something else happens. The bullet expands, it spreads outward. So it's similar to like pressing your thumb down on a ball of clay. And that's what we want to happen. We really could care less if the bullet gets shorter. That's not what we want. But as it squeezes, the soft lead gets bulged out, and that fills the rifling grooves, spins the bullet, and it makes it shoot accurately. And it can shoot quite accurately indeed. And this bullet was used in a very conventional military paper cartridge, the standard form of the European cartridge. There's an outer wrapper of paper that gets rolled up around the bullet and a powder cylinder. Soldier would tear open the end of the cartridge, pours in the powder, flips the cartridge around, inserts the bullet end of the cartridge still wrapped in the paper, tears the excess away, leaving the bullet that's still wrapped in paper in the muzzle. And then the soldier rams that down the barrel, caps and fires. And what this does essentially is it creates a early form of a jacketed bullet. So instead of a copper jacket, like on a modern full metal jacket bullet, we have a full paper jacket of sorts. And that prevents the leading of the barrel when you start getting into higher velocity rounds. Without this paper patch forming a barrier between the lead metal and the steel metal of the barrel, you'd get lead smearing. And this is the standard European style of cartridge. Everyone uses this method. Literally everybody except the United States. So very quickly, in 1856, the United States develops a new style of cartridge, which does not load the bullet still wrapped in paper, so there's no paper patch. And this is the Burton Minier bullet that we used throughout the American Civil War. Um, Very low velocity because, again, there's no jacket, there's no patch, so the bullet has to stay under about 1,000 feet per second. Otherwise, it would lead the barrel. So it's low velocity, but because we used this cartridge during the Civil War, most Americans tend to think of the European style rifle musket cartridge, the standard form of the rifle musket cartridge. We look at them as being weird, unusual, not normal, and we tend to call them infield cartridges because that's where we're familiar with them. The infield rounds imported during the Civil War. The North-South Skirmish Association bans paper-patched bullets. It says they are unsafe and dangerous. They'll start fires, they'll cause guns to cook off. But literally every single other country in the entire rifle musket era, including the Confederates, by the way, which adopted this style of cartridge, used these. So only the Union Army persisted in loading bullets without a paper patch. So it's the American style cartridge that is unusual, not this Lorenz style, European style cartridge. So it is a very, very, my point, this is a conventional cartridge in every aspect. And you might have heard the Lorenz bullet sometimes being called a Wilkinson bullet or the Lorenz Wilkinson bullet. And this name comes from Henry Wilkinson. He was an English gunmaker and sword maker, and he also came up with a compression bullet at about the same time as Joseph Lorenz. There's no evidence that the two men knew each other, knew what the other one was doing. It seems they both independently discovered this new form of bullet. And in 1852, the British also formed a committee to develop the new rifle that they're going to arm their military with, and this would eventually turn out to be the pattern 1853 Enfield rifle musket. And this committee invites all the best gun makers in England to bring their proposed rifle designs. And Henry Wilkinson submits a rifle that also uses his compression bullet. It's interesting that the angle of the grooves is opposite from the Lorenz, but otherwise it is exactly the same concept. It's also a very small bore. His was about a 52 caliber, so it's even smaller than the Lorenz. And the Wilkinson rifle in the tests for the Small Arms Committee in 1852, the Wilkinson rifle shoots great. It's got a super flat trajectory, very high velocity. It's extremely accurate. It was great. The committee thought, we've got a winner here. And it did look like the pattern 1853 rifle would end up being a Wilkinson rifle with a Wilkinson bullet. So the committee tells Wilkinson, we love this bullet. We think it's great. We want to adopt it. Now just go ahead and adopt your ammunition into the standard form of military cartridge. So the bullet is in a paper patch. And the committee said, we'll see how that works. And then Wilkinson goes ahead and makes cartridges up in the standard military form, paper patch bullets, and the results are just awful. The accuracy and the velocity of the rifle are ruined. And Wilkinson quickly realizes what's happening here. He's starting to get a little panicked. The bullets they dig out of the ground that had been fired, the bullets had compressed, and when the grooves pinched together, they would hang on to paper. It would grip paper, pinch paper inside those forced together grooves, and it carried the paper along with the bullet downrange. It took it for a ride. And these paper shards hanging out of the side of the bullet are acting like drag chutes on the bullet. So it's slowing the bullet down, wildly throwing it off course. And it's not super noticeable at short ranges, but at 300-400 yards and beyond, you get really wild shooting. So Wilkinson is almost in a panic here because he's about to lose literally the most fantastic contract any gunmaker could ever imagine, arming the entire British government. Someone suggests, hey, flip around the angle of the grooves on your bullet and see if that helps. And so he does that, and so now his bullet is exactly identical to the one that Lorenz has designed over in Austria. But it still pinches paper. And the committee is starting to run out of patience, and they say, oh dear, this is never going to do. Thank you for trying. Good morning. And Wilkinson gets shown to the door. The committee invites Robert Taylor Pritchett. Of course, he invents the Metford Pritchett bullet that gets adopted by the committee, and so now the pattern 1853 rifle has the Pritchett bullet, and the rest is history. But you may not have known that Wilkinson got this close to getting a compression bullet officially adopted for the pattern 1853 Enfield. Now you might also kind of sense where I'm going with this, and this is where it starts to get really fun. So we've got two compression bullets, right? We have the English and the Austrian, and they are identical, and they are both made up into the standard European cartridge. One of them gets adopted by the Austrian Empire, and they love it. It's super accurate. It shoots great. The other, the English bullet, pinched paper and was an absolute failure, and it's rejected by the committee. And I actually experienced the same failure that Wilkinson had with the same bullet. shooting the Lorenz with this compression bullet in the historic cartridge. And you don't notice so much at 100 yards or less, but at long range, especially when the bullet starts to slow down, you get very wild shooting. So at 400 or 500 yards, out shooting at steel targets in the desert, you do everything exactly right, and then one bullet might hit the steel, and the next is off 50 feet away in a random direction. And so we go up to the target, and we're finding bullets lying all over the place. And I'll show you some of the bullets here. They're, they impact in pretty hard soil, but you can still see they compressed beautifully. Excellent full compression, deep rifling grooves engraved on them. But they grabbed paper, and they all have these little paper drag chutes hanging out of the side. So on one hand, I'm thinking this is kind of cool. I've recreated through experimental archaeology exactly the same phenomenon that Wilkinson was talking about. But what I could not figure out, and this was 5 years ago, what I could not figure out is why did Austria adopt exactly this style of bullet and cartridge if it is pinching the paper and shooting wildly? And it was extremely perplexing. For years, I was looking for the answer to this conundrum. And did the Austrians just kind of shrug it off and say, this is just the cost of doing business? Every now and then we're going to have a wild bullet, or more likely, did they solve the issue? And I kept researching, painfully lurching through these old German texts, and I realized that in none of the primary sources, out of dozens and dozens, maybe even hundreds of primary sources, the Austrians never mentioned the compression bullet pinching paper. Now, all the English sources about the Wilkinson bullet always mention that it was unsuitable for military cartridges because it pinched paper, but not the Austrian sources. So now the mental gears are really starting to spin, because by the late 1850s, the Austrians start to complain about other things about the compression bullet. So the compression bullet, spoiler alert, has a bunch of other problems that limit its performance, but there is no mention of the bullet pinching paper. And the other problems the compression bullet has, by comparison to having drag chutes attached to the bullet, the other problems are relatively minor. So if the Austrians are complaining about problems with the bullet, and they're much more minor than the pinching paper issue, then I assumed that Joseph Lorenz must have found a way to prevent the paper from being pinched in his rifle. Otherwise, there is no way that the Austrians would have adopted it. And of course, this whole time, the solution was obvious. I mean, it's right in front of my face. And come on, who doesn't know that all you need to stop compression bullets from pinching paper is an old castrated sheep? So here's how Lorenz solved the problem that stumped poor old Henry Wilkinson. So the Austrian Lorenz cartridges, just like the standard European infield style cartridges, they're made the same exact way, the same assembly steps, although there's one unusual difference that the Austrian cartridges have. So before the workers assembled the cartridges at the factory, they cut all the papers out, they got everything ready. The outer wrapper, the trapezoid-shaped paper that forms the outer tube of the cartridge, got placed on a template on the workbench, and the worker then brushed on melted grease onto the inside of the outer wrapper paper. And the grease went on the place where the bullet itself would be rolled up with this sheet of paper. And the template made sure that the worker put the grease on exactly the right spot every single time. In the German language instructions, it's interesting. They don't use the usual word that I'm familiar with for grease, Fett or Talg in the Hochdeutsch that I'm familiar with. The Austrian sources use the word Schürzenunschlitt, and this is very Southern German dialect, Austrian German, and not my college Hochdeutsch. But Scherpsen are castrated old sheep. So think of like old mutton sheep in English. And Unschlitt refers to tallow, but it tends to refer to tallow with a higher melting temperature like you'd use to make candles. So it's solid at normal temperatures. So the workers would melt this Schubsen Unschlitt. They would brush it onto the rectangular area on the outer wrapper with an otter hair brush, and they put a very thin coat onto this paper. The instruction said one stroke, two strokes at most, very thin. They're not gooping this grease on. And then the cartridge gets assembled normally, so the bullet gets wrapped up in this greased paper. And I am very grateful to Balash from the excellent Cap and Ball website and YouTube channel for sharing some of this information with me and the images that show where the grease is applied on the paper and the template for the workbench and other things. Um, and while I'm at it, if you have the slightest interest in shooting the Lorenz and learning how to shoot it accurately, your first stop is definitely the Cap and Ball YouTube channel. I expect if you're watching this, you're probably already subscribed to Cap and Ball, but still, Balash is the definition of a classy gentleman. I really appreciate his help. Uh, but this thin layer of grease on the outer wrapper of the paper made sure that the bullet didn't pinch the paper when it is fired. And I can't describe how satisfying it was after 5 years of being perplexed by this to discover a book by an Austrian field marshal, and he wrote a guidebook for new lieutenants, basically. And he explains the why. The instructions simply tell this is what you do it this way, without really going into the reasons why. But in this guidebook for lieutenants, he explains, as Baron Kellemis, he explains the why this was done, and I will give you my best attempt to translate the German so that the part of the paper surrounding the bullet during loading separates promptly and completely from the fired bullet. The inner surface of the paper that directly touches the bullet is greased before rolling. And that is how the Austrians kept their compression bullets from pinching paper. And now you have a use for that old castrated sheep that's been lying around the house all this time. But in addition to brushing the old sheep grease on the inside of the wrapper, once the cartridge was assembled, it gets dipped in grease again at the bullet end, just like you would for any other infield cartridge. And the purpose is the same. This is to keep the fouling soft in the barrel. So the Austrian cartridge ends up lubricated around the bullet inside and out. The compression bullet does not have a hollow base, so the ends of the paper for the cartridge get folded over flat. The corners get tucked in. And this does end up forming kind of a locked in at below the bullet, and it will not come off when you're ramming. It does a surprisingly good job of staying on the bullet. And the Austrians, forming their powder cylinders, they did it a little different. The British and the Americans, most others, for the stiff piece of paper for the powder cylinder, we used a purpose-made piece of stiff paper. In the United States, this was called rocket paper. The British called it cartridge paper. It's essentially like cardstock. It's just a heavier bond of paper. The Austrians didn't use a specific purpose-made paper. Instead, they took 3 sheets of the normal paper and glued them together, and they made their own stiff paper in-house, which I find that fascinating. They would then fill the cartridges. They're filled with 55 Austrian grains of fine powder, which is about 61, 62 US grains. And this is a stout charge. So it's in a 5.47 barrel, but it's using a heavier powder charge than the US Model 1861 rifle, for instance. And that's because that compression bullet needs a real stiff, sudden, sharp kick in the pants to compress it and force it to expand. And the tails of the cartridges, they get twisted and folded in a particular way, sort of similar to the way the infield cartridges were twisted closed, but they had longer tails that end up laid alongside the cartridge. 6 complete cartridges went into a packet along with 8 percussion caps, which were laid out flat and they got folded up into their own little packet inside the 6-round packet. And a slip of paper also, just like the English, got woven between all the cartridges, keeps the grease from spreading from one cartridge to another. And this slip of paper and the entire wrapper was specifically made from acid-free paper, and that prevents the acid from reacting with the grease, and your cartridges are going to last longer. The labels were stamped and then pasted onto the outer wrapper. So they were not stamped right onto the outer wrapper for the bundle of cartridges. So all of mine in these pictures, I've been doing it wrong. I've been stamping it right on the wrapper instead of pasting on a stamped label. But the 6-round packet with the caps gets tied up in string. They get packed into crates. And as for what the labels actually said, the nomenclature of the label, I know what they were after 1863, when the compression bullet, again, another spoiler alert, the compression bullet gets replaced by an expanding bullet. There's an Austrian circular order from 1863 that says we got to update our labels for the new expanding bullet so that we know which type of bullet is in the cartridge packs. Uh, all the original packs that I have seen are post 1863 with the expanding bullet label. There is a 1858 instruction book during the compression bullet era that probably would say what the label is marked with. I don't even know if this uh, manual survives. If it does, it is probably in the Kriegsarchive. If and if you know, please let me know because I would really like to know for sure what the pre-expansion bullet label for the Lorenz cartridges looked like. And for the post 1863 label, again, I'm very grateful to Balash, and he also made the stamp for my labels, which you can get from his shop. But before that, okay, back to the 1850s. 1855, 1856, the Lorenz, Austrian Army, small bore, stout charge, high velocity, flat trajectory. It's actually the highest velocity and flattest trajectory of any of its contemporaries except for the Swiss. The chap will hunt me down and give me an earful if I don't give the Swiss their due credit. But other than the Swiss, the Lorenz has the best ballistics, the longest danger space, and the flatter the trajectory means the less precise the soldier has to be when aiming. So, for example, the enemy is 300 yards away, and in the smoke and carnage of battle, the soldier makes a mistake in estimating that distance. He's off by, let's just say, 50 yards. But with the Lorenz, the bullet is shooting fast enough and flat enough that it is likely that he is still going to hit the enemy. Maybe not center mass, maybe in the ankles, shins, knees. Still going to hit him somewhere because the enemy is still inside that dangerous space. Now, if we take the 1861 Springfield, for example, the soldier is going to miss every single time with an error in distance estimation of 50 yards. It is a mathematical certainty. So the Lorenz does give you a certain battlefield advantage, more so than all of your contemporaries. The Austrians also had a peculiar cartridge used by soldiers who were on guard duty or sentry duty that I can't resist mentioning here, the Wachpatron. Now, I live in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, where it seems every shop selling trinkets to tourists, they sell bullets that had been dug up, Civil War bullets that are dug up, and there's millions of them. And a lot of them, the cheap ones that no one wants, sometimes they're like $1 or two, are the ones that have been wormed out of the barrels. So basically, the bullet was destroyed. But during the war, This was a bullet that the soldier goes on guard duty, he loads his rifle, rams the bullet down, performs his sentry duty, comes off duty, and you're not just going to fire the musket off because that is going to create an alarm. Everyone's going to wonder, who's attacking. So instead, the soldier would screw the worm attachment onto the ramrod, worm out the bullet, which is fairly easy to do in a clean, unfired barrel. But now the bullet has worm marks in it, and the bullet would just get thrown away, and the gunpowder would just be dumped out of the barrel. Now your rifle's unloaded. But throwing away a perfectly good bullet and dumping perfectly good powder horrified Habsburg military authorities in the 1850s. They're always looking for ways to cut costs. Uh, and a lot of the older Austrian weapons also had reusable guard cartridges. And so one was designed for the Lorenz as well. The cartridge was made out of a very thin fabric, a tulle or a organton type of fabric. Think gauze or something like a wedding veil might be made out of. And that is tied around the bullet and filled with gunpowder. And the whole thing gets rammed down the barrel. And at the end of the guard duty, the soldier needs to unload the rifle, and instead of worming it out and destroying the bullet, the soldier put a special screw attachment on the end of the Lorenz ramrod, and that screwed into a preformed female thread in the bullet. And so he can grab the bullet and the Wachpatron and pull it completely out without destroying the cartridge. So the soldier saves this cartridge for his next shift guard duty. Now, if he does have to fire, if there's an intruder or a thief, or he needs to sound an alarm, the flame from the percussion cap can still easily penetrate that gauze-like wrap of the cartridge and set it off. But if he doesn't have to fire, he just unloads it. So it's a good idea in concept, and every soldier was issued one of these Wachpatrone. But the soldiers did not like them because if you've got any grease in your barrel, for instance, oiled barrel, you can imagine what this thing would look like after you go on guard duty a few times. So they would start to turn goopy and fall apart, and the soldier had to pay for them if they got damaged or lost. So good idea, but in practice, maybe not quite so good. And that is the end of the story of Lorenz rifle ammunition. And the compression bullet and the Lorenz rifle lived happily ever after. So I'm Brett, papercartridges.com. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. No, just kidding, because we've got at least another 20, 30 minutes to go. Sorry for those of you that have suffered this far into the video, but the compression bullet, right? It's a good design. It's very clever. It's accurate. It holds its own as a target bullet easily today. But we got to remember the Lorenz and Wilkinson system is a design from the early 1850s. It's essentially a first generation rifle musket bullet, very, very early days. And it was a success. It got Lorenz promoted, decorated. They knight him, actually. But by 1860, the technology is really starting to change, and there's new bullets coming out that are quite honestly better in every way than the original compressive Kugel that Lorenz proposed in the early 1850s. And I have to put aside my own personal enthusiasm here because I love the compression bullet, but I have to acknowledge it's not really the best. And other countries start to adopt new style of bullets, late 1850s, early 1860s. Everyone adopts these new bullets, friends and rivals alike, and this is where the context of what is going on at the time really starts to matter. And a couple of things happen that force Austria to really start thinking about replacing the wonderful Lorenz compression bullet. The first thing that happens is Austria loses the war in 1859 against France in what would become modern Italy. And this is a unexpected loss. Actually, it's a shock. It's a wake-up call to the Austrian Empire and the Austrian army. So what do the Austrians do? Well, they took a deep internal look at what went wrong. Their leaders stepped up and took responsibility. They came up with pragmatic and effective solutions to systemically improve the entire Austrian military. No, actually, they did not do any of that. They immediately started looking for scapegoats. All the generals said, we couldn't possibly have lost because we're bad generals, or that we were unprepared for the war, or that we had poor strategy, we had poor coordination, or it couldn't possibly be because our troops speak 14 different languages. And we certainly didn't lose because we sent all these untrained reservists into battle without ever firing a shot out of the Lorenz rifle, let alone being trained on how to aim, how to estimate distances. So nothing like that. That cannot possibly be why we lost. But the French rifles used a expanding bullet during the battles of 1859, not a compression bullet. And none of the French attacks, well, let me rephrase that. French attacks in the War of 1859 generally were not stopped by Austrian fire. So the French attacked with the bayonet, and the Austrian fire did not stop them. Sometimes it was effective, but most of the time the French got through. So the Austrians decide that the lesson of 1859 isn't to fundamentally change the system, we just want to change the tactics. So the old generals say we were right all along. The bayonet is the preeminent weapon on the modern battlefield. Circa 1860, it is the bayonet. So Austria embraces Stoss tactic over Feuer tactic. So shock attack with the bayonet over firepower. Bayonets will do more than bullets, basically. The bayonet brings the victory. The bullet can influence battle. But the loss in 1859 still adds some pressure to the Austrian army to replace the compression bullet with something better. We cannot afford to have another Solferino. So let's update the tactics and let's improve the bullet. Basically, they're copying the French in all aspects, hedging all of their bets. And the other thing that happens is all the cool kids around Austria are also adopting these new expanding bullets. And this is a little complicated. I will try to explain this as quickly and simply as possible. But in this era, Prussia, the western half of the Austrian Empire, the smaller German states, formed something called the German Confederation. And all you really need to know is this was a successor state to the Holy Roman Empire. It was seen, we'll gather all the German states together in one entity of sorts, a federal entity, so that we can have a common defense against larger powers like France and Russia. But what you really need to know, there's a federal army. There is a Bundesheer at that. All the states of the German Confederation contributed to the Bundesheer. So, for instance, Austria had 3 corps of the Bundesheer were Austrian. The Prussians had 4. And the southern states in Germany, the Catholic German states, tended to align politically with Austria, and the northern, mostly Protestant states tended to align with Prussia. Basically, if you were one of the smaller states in middle Germany, you sided with whichever was closer, Berlin or Vienna. That's which side you leaned politically. And Prussia and Austria were vying for political control of the German Confederation. The southern German states, Hesse-Darmstadt, Württemberg, and Baden, combined all their armies together to form the 7th Corps of the Bundesheer, and Bavaria was large enough that they could field a corps themselves. So they had the 8th Corps. And all of them aligned, these southern German states, the 7th Corps and 8th Corps, aligned politically with Austria. And the states in the 7th Corps, so Hesse-Darmstadt, Württemberg, and Baden, decide, let's adopt a single model of rifle for just better logistics, better everything. Let's adopt one rifle. Essentially, it's an upgraded version of the Lorenz, and they adopt the model 1857 Vereinsgewehr, or the Union rifle. And they adopt it in the same caliber as the Lorenz. So this is a 13.9 millimeter 5.47 caliber rifle. Makes excellent sense because if there's a war, we go to war, Austria's on our side, we can use Austrian ammunition in an emergency, and vice versa. This is one of the preliminary steps to the modern concept of NATO standardization. So we all have the same cartridge. Everyone shoots 5.56, for instance. And Bavaria follows a year later. In 1858, Bavaria updates their rifle. It's also in 13.9 millimeter. Uh, you might think because Bavaria, the 7th and 8th Corps all adopt 13.9 millimeter rifles, they're copying the Lorenz caliber. They would also copy the compression bullet, but none of them actually went along and adopted a compression bullet for their new 13.9 millimeter rifles in the late 1850s. So the three states in the 7th Corps in 1857, the Vereinsgewehr, they initially adopt a Minié style bullet with an iron cup. And everything changes when Bavaria introduces their new rifle in 1858. The Bavarians come out with the Podewils rifle, the System Podewils, which is the rifle and bullet system designed by Philipp Ludwig Freiherr von Podewils, who was the director of the Bavarian rifle factory at Amberg. So there's a new rifle. He has a central ignition channel, which gives just a better ignition and the central burn. It's not a burn with the ignition coming from the side, like in a more conventional percussion rifle. But Podewils, more importantly, adopts a new bullet. So this is the Podewils bullet, and it is a expanding bullet rather than compression. So Expansionsgeschoss in the German. It doesn't have an iron cup. There's no wooden plug. It is simple. It's got a small hollow in the base, but as a small caliber rifle, there's still enough pressure in a small bore when the gun fires that the gas forces itself into this small hollow of the bullet and it forces expansion. Podewils also added a groove, a very small groove. He called it a compression groove. This helps preserve the shape of the bullet when it is fired. It's not a compression groove in the sense of the older compression style bullet, but these shoot great. The Podewils bullet is outstanding. So immediately, the 7th Corps of the Bundesheer ditch their Minié style bullets. They all adopt a Podewils bullet or a Podewils inspired type of bullet. And the Austrians are watching. So all of their neighbors who have adopted 13.9 millimeter rifles have all these cool new bullets, and they're stuck here with the old compression bullet. But what is better exactly about the Podewils versus the compression bullet? It comes down to three main advantages. The first advantage is that the Podewils bullet stays essentially the same length. The compression bullet gets a lot shorter, but the Podewils bullet stays about the same. So that is a better bullet for a rifle. By the late 1850s, it's very well understood that a short, stubby bullet is not the ideal form. The compression bullet with the Lorenz, the original design, it comes out of the muzzle looking very similar to like a 45 ACP slug, and you don't need to have a PhD in ballistics to know that a 45 ACP slug is not the best projectile for long range accuracy. So the Podewils is just simply more accurate, especially at long range. And second, the Podewils bullet can expand more than the Lorenz can compress. So what I mean by that is you can have a bullet that's a little bit smaller, that's not quite as tight a fit in the bore. So it's faster to load, easier to load, yet it will still fully expand and take the rifling. So a bullet with a hollow base, like the Podewils, the lead gets forced out laterally when the gun fires. The action of the bullet, the movement of the lead is going outwards. While the compression bullet, there is no hollow. It can't expand outwards until the lead squashes up against itself and it kind of oozes out. And this compression expansion, there's not much outward expansion. So for it to be effective, you have to have very little windage. In other words, the bullet has to fit the barrel very, very tightly. And in combat situations, this quickly results in difficult loading. The Podewils bullet can expand considerably more than a compression bullet, so you can make one that is a looser fit in the barrel, much easier to load, but it's still accurate. So it's a better battle bullet. And the third advantage of the Podewils is that it's faster and has an even flatter trajectory than the Lorenz compression bullet. The Podewils bullet requires less energy to expand. So the compression bullet, the expansion is essentially just a byproduct of the compression. The compression itself doesn't fill any rifle grooves, but the expansion bullet, the expansion is the main action. It's not the byproduct. So they did tests, same gun, the same barrel, the same powder charge, same everything. And the Podewils simply shot faster. And they realized this is because the compression bullet requires more energy out of that powder charge to squeeze the bullet down and force the lead out into the grooves. There's more lead that has to move. But the expansion bullet, there's less lead that has to move, and it expands. All the energy is pushing forward rather than being wasted on compressing the bullet. So it gives you, practically, it gives you a flatter trajectory, higher velocities, all for the same charge of powder. So it's essentially, it is just better in all respects. And in the late 1850s, Austria starts seriously considering a switch to the Podewils bullet. And there isn't much debate on the question, and the Podewils is just indisputably better. But Austria, they're in the middle of a military reorganization. They're rewriting the tactical manual. There's an emphasis on the bayonet. They cut the allowance of ammunition for marksmanship training, and it ends up taking several years before the Austrians finally switch officially to the expanding bullet. And that was in May of 1863 when Kaiser Franz finally signs off on the official switch in a circular order that states the obvious. He says that extensive comparative shooting tests with the previous compression and expansion bullets have shown noticeably greater accuracy, especially at longer distances in all rifled small arms when using the expansion bullets. And because this is the frugal Austrian Empire, the order also says we're not going to issue any expanding ammunition until all of the compression ammo is used up. And because there's two types of ammo being used now, the order says you got to label the packs of cartridges specifically. This is expanding ammunition to differentiate from the older compression. But otherwise, the cartridges are made up exactly the same, right down to continuing to grease the inside of the outer wrapper. And the powder cylinder is made the same way, gluing the sheets of paper together. But the compression bullet, it soldiers on, surprisingly, and continued to be issued right up to the very end. From the War of 1866 at Königgrätz and other battlefields, they archaeologists have recovered more compression bullets in the ground than Podewils expanding bullets. So in 1866, 14 years after Werkführer Lorenz first proposes his system, his bullets are still being used in battle, and they serve the emperor well. It's tragic, honestly, that Austria revised their tactics and they valued the bayonet shock over firepower when they really did have an excellent rifle and an excellent bullet by 1866. And I do get asked a lot, did Americans use Lorenz ammo during the American Civil War, especially when so many Lorenz rifles end up being imported? And the short answer is no, with maybe a small little asterisk. The slightly longer answer is that it is possible that a very, very small quantity of Austrian ammo may have been purchased by the Confederacy. I haven't seen any documented bullets, Austrian compression bullets, that have been dug from the American Civil War. There are some bullets that people claim to be Austrian, and they just aren't. For the Union, most Lorenz rifles that the Union gets were bored out to 58 caliber or purpose made in 58 caliber, and they're just using the standard old Union Burton Minier. And the Revs, most of their rifles were in the 5.47 original Austrian caliber, but they're also using the Burton Minier style or downsized Pritchett bullets. There's some shipping manifests from ammunition made in England for the Confederates that talks about Austrian cartridges for Austrian rifles. These were almost certainly 54 caliber Pritchett style cartridges made by contractors in England. They weren't compression bullets. And the compression bullet was known in America. The Delafield Commission was given Lorenz rifle and ammunition when they were there in 1855. Major Mordecai tested the Lorenz. He was not impressed. He made his own version of compression bullets to test in the U.S. rifle, and he found it to be inferior to the Burton Minier bullet. Lieutenant Cadmus Wilcox went to Austria in 1857, and he describes the compression bullet in his book Rifles and Rifle Practice. So there's no reason by 1861, by the start of the American Civil War, for the U.S. or the Confederacy to use compression bullets for the Lorenz rifle, because by 1861 the compression bullet is obsolete, and it was already being superseded as the best form of projectile for the battlefield. Now today the Lorenz and the compression bullet are experiencing a sort of revival. They're getting pretty popular with the NSSA, the Wilkinson style without a paper patch, because you can't use a paper patch with an NSSA. But it is a very accurate bullet. And if you're only shooting at 50 yards, you really don't care about the long range battlefield distance performance of the bullet. So it's a growing popular bullet with the NSSA. And there's also a available reproduction rifle. Pedersoli is making a reproduction Type 2 Lorenz Infanteriegewehr. It's not an exact replica of the original. It's kind of disappointing. It was made specifically as a target rifle and not necessarily for historical recreation of the original. But it has still definitely raised the popularity of the compression bullet. And Pedersoli makes a mold for their rifle, a Wilkinson compression style bullet. And this is capable of very, very accurate shooting. If you don't believe me, just go watch some of Balazs' videos shooting over on Cap and Ball. But if you ask me what I think, like I said at the beginning, I really like the compression bullet, and it's been the Paper Cartridges logo for a long time. And in fairness, I really enjoy shooting it. But it is not a good long-range bullet. It just isn't. And I had trouble with the paper pinching issue long before I discovered that the solution is, old sheep grease. And I haven't had the opportunity yet to test the compression bullet with the greased paper. I'm still overseas. But in Europe, soaking the paper patch for compression bullets seems to be fairly common knowledge. My friend Schambor soaks his patches with lube and gets excellent results. He says that the paper separates every time. Balazs does the same thing and gets excellent, excellent results. But I am very, very excited about shooting the Podewils bullet. And maybe a month or so before I deployed last year, a custom mold finally arrived, and I feel a little regret at twisting the arm of the mold maker to hurry up and make it. But I got it. I cast some bullets up. I made cartridges. I made 3 6-round packs of cartridges. Loaded them up, 61 grains of Swiss powder, and ran off to the range with an original Lorenz that I had just picked up from the Horse Soldier with beautiful, pristine rifling. Went up to the State Game Lands range, 100-yard range. And I also brought the Dreise Fusilier Gewehr. I was testing new sabots with that. This was a beautiful morning back in October. I had the range all to myself. There's no cool kids with ARs there. Shot the Dreiser first, and that made a mess of the target. And I realized now I should have replaced the target before I started shooting the Lorenz with the new Podewils, but I didn't. So I loaded what was possibly the first Podewils bullet to go down a Lorenz barrel in many years, and I shot a 6-round group from the bench and was very impressed. The taped over holes here are from the Dreiser, and you can see the 6 holes that kind of danced around the X here, and those were the first shots ever out of my rifle with this Podewils bullet. And keep in mind, this is not a target load. This is the full military service load, and that put them all within the 8-inch black. I shot a 5-round challenge with the Lorenz, unsupported, and then I went back to the bench, and I had 7 rounds left. I held a little bit to the left because the others tended to pull a little right, and this is the results, which for me is very impressive because I am truly not a great shot, especially from the bench. I'm not very good, so there's a lot of vertical stringing. I'm sure that is a, from me and not the bullet or the rifle. But what is really most impressive to me is that the Podewils bullet shoots amazingly well, even with the service cartridge. A few days later, I went up to the 300-yard range, did the same thing, 6 rounds. The first round I fired, I used the 300 Schritt sight, and that one went a little low. I went up to the 400 Schritt sight for the rest, and as you can see, they generally all hit center mass. So not great shooting, but definitely within a minute of Prussian all day long. And as I always do, I went behind the backstop and I start looking for the bullets, and I found several of these Podewils bullets. Now notice the expansion effect of the gas. So the base of the bullet has turned concave. The gas pressure has pushed forward and out in that hollow base. And because the Podewils bullet doesn't have any deep grooves to compress, all that energy was applied to accelerating the bullet once it was expanded and obturated into the rifling. And these are fired at 300 yards. Now, most of the bullets that I fire at 300 yards and I recover from behind the backstop are mostly intact. They'll have a slightly blunted nose. But you can see these Podewils bullets, the massive amount of deformation, like 3/4 of the front end of the bullet is just mushroomed. That's indicating they hit the ground at a higher velocity than most rifle musket bullets. So I'm estimating the average speed of the Podewils bullet, and I put a GoPro camera out at the target as well. So judging by when I can hear the sound of the bullet impact and then hear the sound of the rifle shot, the average speed of the bullet then works out to be slightly supersonic, so about 1150 feet per second or 350 meters per second or so. All that just goes to say this thing has a wickedly flat trajectory for a rifle musket. It's moving several hundred feet per second faster than the Burton Minier from a Civil War rifle. Uh, and when I go home, I have to chronograph these. I think the initial velocity is going to be somewhere in the ballpark of 1,300 feet per second. The compression bullet, incidentally, was 1,230 feet per second at the muzzle. So the Podewils is only marginally faster, I think, which makes sense historically, but it also gives you these phenomenal downrange ballistics. And because I'm a river to my people, here are the dimensions for the Podewils bullet in inches if you want to have a mold made for yourself. Now keep in mind, these dimensions are for the bullet with a paper patch, so if you want to shoot it without a patch, you need to increase the dimensions to fit your bore. I promise we're almost done. The last cartridge I want to talk about for the Lorenz was arguably the world's first smokeless powder cartridge, because the Austrians made a determined effort to adopt a gun cotton cartridge for the Lorenz. Now, the good news is I've already made 2 full-length videos on the Austrian gun cotton cartridges, and you can check out those videos. One of me shooting the gun cotton cartridge, and then the other of the history and development for it. So finally, I know this has been very, very long. There's probably 8 of you left here, but we are done. That is the history and the development of Austrian Lorenz rifle musket ammunition. It really was an amazing system. The unique compression bullet system and the Podewils bullet, which has been almost completely forgotten by history. But both of these bullets gave the Lorenz exceptional ballistic capabilities over a 12 to 14 year service life. Uh, Honestly, among the best, perhaps even the best ballistics of any rifle musket, and it blows the socks off of any American rifle musket for this era. That just goes without saying. But I have a few more Lorenz projects coming up with a lot of video that I'm actually going to use this time that I took last summer, last fall before I ended up deploying. I have a video where I make the argument that the Lorenz was the best rifle musket of the era. I think I can defend that quite well. In another video, it's an updated comparison video between the Lorenz and the 13 Gewehr, circa 1866. Now that I have the Podewils bullet, and I have also improved the sabots for my 13 ammo. So this project, by the way, it did take a long time to make, especially painfully doing research in German. And my German is passable, but this is technical German, and it's in Fraktur. Hard for me to read, but these long form videos tend not to get very many views, and it's made specifically for like the 12 of you who appreciate the deep dive study level look into Austrian ammo. So if you're one of those who enjoy these sort of projects, please like and subscribe. It is a great encouragement to me. And hopefully this was useful to you. And if nothing else, maybe it helped you fall asleep. So while I have any voice left, I'm going to wrap this up. I am Brett from papercartridges.com. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.